So welcome everyone. My name is Carson McPherson-Krutzke. I'm a research associate at the Natural Hazard Center here at the University of Colorado Boulder. I'm very happy to welcome you to the first webinar of our new year for the Making Mitigation Work webinar series. This is hosted by the Natural Hazard Center and made possible through funding support from the Federal Emergency Management Agency as well as the National Science Foundation. If you are new to this webinar series, it was launched in 2019, and all of our webinars highlight recent progress on mitigation, policy, practice, and research, or related in some way to that theme. I want to share a few announcements before we get going. The forum is being recorded, and the captioned video recording and the presentation slides from today's webinar will be posted online at the Natural Hazard Center website at hazards.colorado.edu. This is also where you can find recordings from previous webinars as well as supplemental materials and gain access to other free resources. So please do go ahead and check those out after our meeting today. We do like to host questions at the end. So in a few moments, I'm going to turn the controls over to our speakers. But if at any point during the presentation you have a question or a comment, please feel free to submit those. You can do that either using the chat function at the bottom or the Q&A box. I will be monitoring both of those locations and holding questions for about the last 15 minutes at the end. Thanks to our partnership with the International Association of Emergency Managers, or IAEM, attending this webinar makes you eligible for 1 contact hour of emergency management training through IAEM. To receive this credit, you are required to attend the entire webinar session. And if you fulfill this requirement, you can go ahead and please email us at hazcenter@colorado.edu to request your certificate. You can also visit our Making Mitigation Work webinar page under the Trainings tab on our website for more information on how to request continuing education credits. Now, I'm very excited to introduce today's webinar, which is titled Prepared for Anything, the Role of Business Continuity in Organizational Resilience. Today, we're going to be hearing from 2 speakers from the Colorado Rocky Mountain chapter of the Association of Continuity Professionals, also known as ACP, who will share what business continuity is and the benefits of partnering with continuity professionals to strengthen community resilience, whether it's private or public sector. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. We first have Russ Laughlin, who is an expert in cybersecurity, project management, and business administration, who recently retired from 50 years in the IT industry. His last 20 years were spent focusing on business continuity and disaster recovery. Laughlin remains active in the continuity community as president of the Rocky Mountain Association of Continuity Professionals and as a non-medical volunteer with the Front Range Veterinary Medical Reserve Corps and Rocky Mountain Medical Reserve Corps. Joining Russ, we have Dan McCarter, who has served the resilience and continuity community for over 14 years, helping organizations of all sizes from small financial institutions to large multinational organizations protect their business and streamline their programs and with technology. Today, he represents Fusion Risk Management, a software company that helps clients through the beginning stages of their resilience journey. As the Director of Programs and Education for the Colorado Rocky Mountain chapter of the Association of Continuity Professionals, McCarter arranges speakers for monthly meetings and manages outreach to local universities as well as shared events with other resilience-related associations. So welcome, Russ and Dan, and I will go ahead and stop sharing and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Carson. Let me share my screen.
That's great.
Perfect. All right, Russ.
So I think Carson covered my background pretty well. At one of our interactions a little while ago, she said, you know, you could think of yourself as an independent continuity professional, and I like that idea. It sounds way better than a retired old guy. And so I appreciate being invited. And I think one thing, Carson, you might have missed was that at least at the moment, I'm president of the Rocky Mountain chapter of the Association of Continuity Professionals. You'll probably hear us call it ACP from here on out. And that's an organization for business continuity professionals. And as you'll see in a couple of minutes, BC can be pretty broadly applied. Dan?
Yeah, wonderful introduction, Carson. I think you covered it fairly well. Been in the space for a long time and just looking to help all types of organizations grow their resilience, whether it be public, private, small or large. It's kind of a passion of mine.
So this is just a quick disclaimer. The views that you'll see here are Dan and mine. They're not necessarily representative of ACP's views, nor any current or past employer. In addition, I've noticed that folks using Chat GPT more regularly in presentations, and we used it just as kind of a general sanity check to make sure that what we were presenting here was, kind of consensus views, and found it fairly useful. Go ahead, Dan. All right, I'd like to thank Carson for inviting us. I'm really excited to be here today to present. And ACP has some prior background with National Hazard Center. Kathy, Dr. Turney spoke to us, I guess, about 10 years ago at a chapter meeting. And I know that we have individual members that interact some with natural hazards, including attending the annual summer workshop in July. This quick outline of what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you a little bit more of a high-level flavor of business continuity and what it is, a little bit of the history of business continuity, and then Dan is going to pick it up and give us a current state of the art where business continuity is at the moment, where he thinks it's going, and maybe some potential interest to private, public. And then we'll have a little more comments at the end and questions. So, all right. So again, I'm really excited to be here because I have a vision and a passion for business continuity. And I also believe that it is the business continuity is a member of the broader emergency management, emergency planning, and associated academic community. There are a couple of reasons for that. When people ask me, what is a business continuity planner? What I tell them is that it's the private sector equivalent to a public sector emergency manager. And I really believe that's accurate. We have similar goals. Business continuity strives to continue an organization's critical functions after unexpected events, and emergency management strives to ensure well-being of communities during and after crisis. We have similar frameworks. ISO 22301 is the Bible for business continuity, folks, but it has a number of analogies and similarities to, say, the COOP FDC 1 and FDC 2. NIST 834, which is the public sector disaster recovery standards, I have used in private sector basically the entire time I've done disaster recovery as a model for my continuity plans. I found it very useful. I suspect that there is other opportunities, that there are other areas rather where professionals in either public and private sector kind of cross-fertilize with the other standards. I know that in terms of tools, we have some commonality. For instance, business continuity typically has emergency notification for employees. The tool that I've used, Everbridge, that I'm most familiar with, is also one that I know is used commonly in emergency notification. There are probably other tools that I'm not aware of, perhaps in crisis management, and so on. And finally, at least in my personal experience, I've had pretty good luck and seen folks come out of the public sector with a background in emergency management, either experience or academic training or both, and move very successfully into the business continuity world. and have very successful careers there. So next slide, Dan. All right, so hopefully I've given you kind of a tiny flavor of what business continuity is. Business continuity owes its origin and its growth to the information technology that is computer revolution. It began, at least in terms of business continuity, that began in the early 50s when you started to see business computers being used in organizations. As the use of computers continued to grow, there was more and more organizational dependence on having those computers. Certainly by the 70s, companies that lost their computer services were at serious risk of not being able to run their business. In parallel with that growing dependence, you saw almost exclusively IT professionals working on methodologies and techniques that would allow them to maintain the computer systems and operations and also recover them in the event of a disaster. At the time, the primary technology in use was tape backups. Some of you may not remember tapes. Tapes that I'm talking about would be the old 9-track reels that were, not quite a foot in diameter, 8 or 9 inches, as I recall. And you've probably, if nothing else, seen pictures of them in I suppose, history books. As the technology continued to grow in use, as you continue to see computers expand, and really the expansion was even more dramatic than it had been in the 50s and 60s, in the 70s through the 90s, when not just mainframe computers started to be seen, but also mini computers in the 70s, and then personal computers in the late 70s and well into from then on out. And as the organizations became ever more dependent on the computers, that you continue to see a formalization of the methodologies associated with keeping the machine services available and recovering them in the event of a disaster. Prior to the 90s anyway, the typical methodology for keeping your computer services available was to have an alternate data center. You'd have a primary data center, say in one city, an alternate in another. And depending on how much money you wanted to spend, if you lost your data center in the primary, you could fail over either very, very quickly, matter of hours, or if you weren't willing to spend the money, perhaps a longer period of days. Then as we moved into the 90s, there became a recognition that the techniques that had been developed for disaster recovery of computer systems could also be applied to other aspects of the organization. As an example, same techniques that you could use to plan for and recover a data center to keep it running could also be applied to something like a call center, could be applied to a manufacturing center. And with that realization, folks started to say, well, we should be looking not just at the technology, but at the people and the facilities and planning around all those aspects of business. And as that realization came about, they kind of expanded the concept of disaster recovery to business continuity, with disaster recovery of tech being more focused on technology, specifically technology, while business continuity in general would be applied to people as well as facilities and other technologies and supplies. The Disaster Recovery International Institute, DRII, introduced a certification in business continuity programming in the mid-90s, and that probably became the initial definition, or provided the initial definition of the continuity profession. As we moved into this century, probably the driving factor in continuing disaster recovery's process of becoming a formal discipline was the introduction of legal requirements. Sarbanes-Oxley, possibly the most important of them, And Sarbanes-Oxley required that companies in scope for the act, that companies in scope attest to their disaster recovery capabilities. If you did not, in fact, honestly represent your DR capabilities, your business continuity capabilities, then you were subject to up to and including criminal sanctions. I remember at the time Sarbanes-Oxley was first introduced, an auditor coming in into the team that he was working with on our side, the company side, say, you know, you guys lied to me, you can go to jail now. We did not lie, by the way, or go to jail anyway. But that was the first serious elevation, if you will, of business continuity in the professional, because it carried potentially serious sanctions. HIPAA information, PCI, those also reinforced that groundwork that Sarbanes-Oxley, among others. So then as we moved on into the remainder of this century, we saw some more continued solidification and formalization of business continuity, continued increase in legal requirements associated with business continuity. ISO 22301, which was based on, I believe it was a British standard introduced in the prior decade, 25999, became the international standard for business continuity. It's, as I said, kind of the Bible for our profession. And simultaneously with moving into a more formal methodology, we also continue to see an expansion of the concept, going from initially disaster recovery and IT up to organizational continuity. And now we're starting to see a broader concept of resiliency, looking at the entire resiliency of the organization, of the community, and so on. And that's going to be my segue to turning this over to Dan, who can talk to us about the world we live in now and where he thinks it's going.
Perfect. Thanks, Russ. So something that's happened over the last probably 5-6 years is a shift from the overall kind of approach of business continuity into more of a look at resilience, right? So not just business continuity, but looking outside into all the different things that it touches to really enhance the overall resilience of an organization. So one thing I wanted to kind of define for you guys real quick is what is organizational resilience? So ultimately, it's the ability to anticipate, adapt, and respond to changing circumstances. So it's not just about recovery, getting back up and running. It's about thriving in adversity, so being better off than you were before. So ultimately, long-term success across an entire organization. So one of the key components of organizational resilience is operational resilience or continuity. So let's dive a little bit deeper into a key aspect or key aspects of operational resilience. So this is a very busy wheel here. In fact, there's a lot that goes into operational resilience. Everything from crisis and incident management, business continuity, compliance, policies, third-party risk management, and then all of the facilities, sites, all the things that kind of fall underneath them and above them, speaking to the overall culture of an organization. But ultimately, these elements are all required to kind of work together. It requires a proactive approach. You have to integrate in order to effectively support the organization. We don't have time to talk about all the different pieces today. But we can certainly dive into some of the very critical aspects. All right, so this slide outlines the essential elements that support operational resilience. Each of these areas, such as ITDR, cyber risk, third-party risk management, all play a critical role, and even ensuring physical safety and managing third-party risks, which can often be overlooked and certainly were pre-COVID. But they are absolutely essential to building overall resilience. So think about how these elements are interconnected, not just what I'm talking about, but maybe within your own organization, how they might work together or interact on a day-to-day basis. So specifically business continuity, see it's in the center there, or COOP, continuity of operations in the public sector, is critical for an overarching understanding of what each discipline needs to function. So in most cases, they know, the business continuity manager or professional that's kind of responsible for the continuity of operations. In most cases, they know more than just the tops of the waves of all these different elements. They're interacting on a daily basis with all of these folks, all these different disciplines under operational resilience. And so they're typically the hub, right? They act as, basically the knowledge center for everything the organization needs from a high level. Of course, they need to rely on these folks to execute at time of interruption and on those strategies that they help define. So how does business continuity build resilience? So business continuity enables organizations to withstand disruptions by ensuring preparedness, enabling a rapid recovery, and ultimately fostering a culture of adaptability, all of which are absolutely critical for resilience. Now, business continuity ultimately builds resilience through a very structured, iterative process. So assessing the known and attempting to uncover the unknown risks. It's essentially a key that, once uncovered, those risks, if you support them with redundant systems, for example, like IT infrastructure or redundant locations or generators or additional staff or cross-training. There's lots of different ways that folks can, apply those redundant systems, but then for gathering that information and understanding what risks they're vulnerable to, risk assessments, business impact analysis is how they, ultimately will gather that information. Then you look into the preparedness side of things. So actually developing a plan, testing and exercising, absolutely critical. If the employees that are responsible for executing on these plans aren't, essentially able to adapt, but also understand the procedures, they won't be able to, continuously improve, which ultimately improving from actual disasters themselves, the true test, but then also from your exercises, continuously getting better and being able to respond more efficiently is absolutely critical. And it speaks directly to that rapid recovery. So collaboration, interdiscipline collaboration is absolutely critical. Clear communication, I think that's applicable in everything, not just rapid recovery, but ultimately across an effective organization, right? Clear communication is absolutely critical, and then being able to adapt. So I mentioned it before, being able to adapt. So the plan is just a plan, right? It provides a structure and an ability for you to take a direction with a recovery, but you have to be able to adapt. Things change. Maybe you don't know that a certain third-party supplier is going to be out as well, and that wasn't in your plan. You have to think about how you're going to get around that particular issue. So I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of a recent disaster and how public and private sectors maybe have approached the preparedness side as well as the execution. Talk a little bit about maybe some successes in the response, as well as some evidence of preparedness and also lessons learned, right? Maybe what we could have done better. So the wildfires, so including Palisades, Eaton fires, they really highlight the devastating powers of natural disasters and really the critical need for resilience planning. The fires have burned over 40,000 acres and claimed at least 27 lives and destroyed over 12,000 structures. Easily the most devastating wildfire in history. And the projected cost, insured cost at least, exceed $20 billion. So these tragedies really remind us of the importance of proactive measures to protect lives and communities. And in resilience planning, strengthening that infrastructure and fostering preparedness can reduce the impact of such disasters and really help communities recover stronger. And so I think together, we can rebuild with compassion and determination, creating a safer and more resilient future, not just in LA, but across the country. So let's look at the public sector response. So Los Angeles Emergency Management, they've been preparing for an event like this for years. So they put in evacuation protocols and drills, along with community outreach initiatives like Ready, Set, Go, to really familiarize the residents with them. They organized heavily trained Los Angeles Fire Department and LA County Fire Department with specialized units for both urban and wildland interface fires. The city also leverages technology, so GIS mapping, to really identify high-risk zones and track fire progression in real time. They also leverage drones, in addition to the satellite imagery, to really understand how they need to pivot and potentially change evacuation routes. Of course, they use emergency alert systems similar to Everbridge. That might actually be Everbridge, but I don't know for a fact on that. But they were able to notify their residents promptly. Overall, it was an effective multi-agency collaboration to successfully, excuse me, evacuate more than 170,000 residents. So some lesson learned that have kind of come to the surface thus far. So there was a bit of communication failure. Some residents reported delays or lack of clarity. There were some language barriers for non-English speakers. Some miscommunication between state, local, and federal agencies that took place. There's also been infrastructure challenges. So water supply issues has been huge, very low pressure for the firefighters. Power outages have made communication more complicated. They've also experienced resource shortages. So not just staffing, but also equipment. So lots of firefighters, thousands were deployed. But the sheer scale really kind of pulled back and made it very difficult to manage. Ultimately, fire trucks and helicopters were insufficient, or they were delayed. Another element was a vulnerable population being left behind. So we do have some reports, some news stories where some evacuation plans did not account adequately for individuals with mobility challenges. Now, with the private sector, I've actually spoken with, that's part of kind of what I do on a day-to-day basis, speak with clients, and I spoke with several. They've all had kind of similar stories in a lot of ways, but I'll share a couple with you. So one specifically that I spoke with, they actually were able to basically proactively relocate some of their employees across the state or out of the state with their families to really ensure that safety. Another told me that they notified their employees of the fact that in California, the insurance company has to provide an advance to the insured in a regional event before they could come out for an assessment, which potentially could take months. Another shared that they were helping their 300 plus employees in the area find suitable housing that would allow for pets, and provided stipends for not only for them to be able to eat, but also to make sure that their pets had food and supplies as well. Some lesson learned from the private sector. So many of the larger companies had already addressed supply chain issues in the event of regional interruption, but many mid-sized and smaller companies really lacked the capability. There was a huge need for employee support programs. Many organizations who had planned for events like this were able to relocate employees, like I mentioned before, and provide housing, while those who had not prepared took longer, affecting their employees, but of course, the company bottom line as well. The importance, something else that came out of it was the importance of shifting workload among employees. So a lot of organizations, especially ones that aren't all like small local businesses, maybe they span across a city or a state or a country, or even globally. There a lot of times they're able to shift workload to other folks on teams that maybe aren't in that same affected area. And so for some folks, that's not really a capability, but the other option that was found useful was work from home capabilities, and getting people set up in another area, and then of course they still have access to their technology. One other thing that kind of came out of this, a lot of organizations still had technology to track threats and alert their employees in a timely manner. Some of them, however, wished that they had proactively evacuated their employees that were in kind of warning areas to reduce the amount of stress. So getting in front of that right before they're actually told to evacuate, saying, hey, let's go ahead and get you out of that area to kind of minimize that level of stress on the employees and their families. And then something else that came out of it, and it was kind of new to me and I had not heard of, was critical incident stress management programs. Basically deploying these types of solutions can actually help employees cope post incident and really be able to deal with that type of incident and recover faster mentally and be able to get back to work. So what can we learn from the fires? So we can extract a few key takeaways about preparation, coordination, and adaptability. So for instance, effective communication and collaboration across both public and private with the community often determines the success of that response effort, right? So the public sector being able to communicate those evacuation orders and provide supplies with FEMA and other response efforts, as well as companies that can help out their employees, get them set up in places to live or at least stay in the time being, is incredibly important. And then obviously, continuous improvement, right? This is a big test. It tested the systems that were already, the protocols and the evacuation plans that were already set in place. They can only get better from here, right? Adding in new mitigation moving forward. There were some of the takeaways as well that I did not put in the slide, but a lot of different avenues to grow and enhance on this type of event. So I did want to share a few things that I've been seeing, not just from the LA fires, but in general in the space. So for both public and private sector, organizations are increasingly adopting technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data analytics, and process automation to really enhance resilience and business continuity. So the technologies really aid in the anticipation of those disruptions and ultimately streamline that recovery process and ultimately improving decision-making during a crisis. So the focus has also been on supply chain resilience. So after COVID and the ever-changing landscape of threats since, it has become evident that supply chain is a big weakness of many organizations out there, both public and private. However, many organizations have deployed strategies like diversification of suppliers, so adding multiple suppliers to kind of mitigate that, as well as leveraging mapping and monitoring software or technology to their supply chain. Now, the ability to quickly adapt to changing conditions is becoming a cornerstone of organizational resilience. Agile methodologies and flexible planning processes enable organizations to respond swiftly to disruptions and then maintain operational continuity and capitalize on emerging opportunities in a very dynamic environment. So resilience isn't just the responsibility of one team or department in an organization. It really requires a collaboration across an entire community. So by aligning efforts and really focusing on fostering a culture of resilience, we can build organizations that are prepared for anything. So to build that resilient organization, both sectors have to prioritize continuity planning. So by learning from each other's successes and challenges, we can create a unified approach to preparedness, ensuring a stable and secure future for all. Now, let me pass this back over to Russ. He's going to actually talk about some ways that we believe we can accomplish this.
So thanks, Dan. I hope that I've maybe been able to share with you my at least beliefs that business continuity is a part of the broader emergency planning, disaster response environment, emergency response environment, and that we have things that we can bring of value and methodologies that might be of interest to the broader community, as well as I certainly think we can learn from what folks in the public sector are doing and apply them, as I said, to our business as well. A comment that I'd make, which is that Natural Hazard Center, by definition, implies that it focuses on natural disasters, but I think we're starting to see that technology disasters can have a pretty broad implication to our communities, as well as the more conventional threats. I'm thinking, for instance, if you happen to be flying last July when the CrowdStrike outage occurred, that was certainly a technology disaster, and that was probably being addressed by business continuity folks and crisis management teams within their technology groups. So some of the things that we're responsible for can certainly have some negative implications if we're not successful in our job. But there are definitely areas where I think we can perhaps share common lessons and learn from each other. I have found, for instance, that the FEMA Emergency Management Institute's courses are useful, and have taken some and actually applied them to what I was doing in the private sector. I suspect that you could make analogous statements about what our business continuity organizations, Business Continuity Institute, Disaster Recovery Institute International, some of their courses and classes might be of value. And then there are a lot of professional organizations that are going to have parallel interests, including things like crisis management, risk assessment, and so on. Project Management Institute, again, DRII. Also, I suspect that there is some opportunity for partnership between our groups. I'm working with a couple of folks, at least one of which is on this call, to try and put together a workshop for medical professionals, teaching them the basic concepts of business continuity and how to perform that. The belief is that losing a medical practice or hospital, whether it be human or veterinary, can have a serious and negative impact on the community. And so it is important to both emergency planners and business continuity professionals to try and see that the medical organizations are protected both against emergencies and traditional kind of disaster situations, but also more exotic things like technology problems such as ransomware and so on. So we're working on that, and there are, I suspect, plenty of other opportunities for folks that have interest in either continuity or disaster response to collaborate together. Again, I'd like to thank Carson for taking the time to pull us in. I certainly enjoy talking to folks in this community, and I think we're ready to take questions. Dana?
Excellent. Well, thank you both for that excellent presentation and giving us some really helpful definitions of what business continuity is, as well as I think the example from the LA fires was really helpful to put it into context. So everyone here, please join me in a virtual round of applause for the wonderful presentation. Thank you. We do have some questions that came in while you were presenting, so we'll go ahead and start with those. But if folks have additional questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. We may have time for them. So we'll go ahead and just start with the first one here. So Lily Zhu asks, what certifications for business continuity are recommended for the public sector?
So and Dan, perhaps you're more familiar with this than I am, but I believe DRII has a business continuity certification that is oriented towards emergency managers and public sector. Am I recalling that correctly?
That is correct. Yeah. Disaster Recovery Institute.
So I would look to the DRII, and I'm the certification I have is from DRII. There is also business continuity institute that is more widely recognized outside the United States. And they may have offerings as well. I'm just not familiar with them. There are also other, if you just Google for business continuity, you'll find a variety of providers that offer products in this space, at least some of which will have a more public sector orientation. Another certification that you might consider is the project management professional. That even though it is project management oriented, it brings a lot, particularly if you're a planner, it does bring a lot of value. I think for that, I know several emergency managers that are certified with the PMP. Did that answer?
Great. Yeah, that's super helpful. Also, as a quick follow-up, Allison asked, does ACP have a Canadian chapter? Do you know?
I don't know. I
Okay.
can ask. I don't know. I think all of the chapters that come to mind are in the United States. There might possibly be a business continuity chapter in north of Seattle, or there might be folks that come down. But on the subject, that was a nice segue. Our chapter has virtual programs that are open virtually. So anyone that's interested and is on this call is welcome to join us remotely. And if I think we're going to see my my email address shortly. It's on the deck. If you're interested and want to get on our mailing list with programs, just shoot me a line and we'll send you on to actually Mary Kay Hyatt is
I think she's
on.
dropping some links in the chat, so that's great.
Okay, super. Thanks, Mary Kay. So
Yeah.
she is actually the one that will put you on the list. So
Great.
if you look at what she's got in the chat, just hit her up for it, and you can certainly welcome to contact me as well.
Great. All right, we'll go to our next question, which is from an anonymous attendee. They ask, as a local government, how can we best support and encourage businesses across diverse sectors to create business continuity plans? What are the most helpful ways to support?
So funny you should ask. Chelsea Mazur, who is also on the call, and I are doing a presentation at the Colorado Emergency Manager Association conference in February, pretty much on that topic, which is, as I said earlier, we're trying to put together a workshop for medical professionals. And so the answer to your question is it's not easy, I think is going to be the summary of our presentation. There are a bunch of considerations to take into account. The most, perhaps the biggest challenge is to get the attention of your business professionals, of your business sector folks. And there are a number of other challenges, but getting the attention of the business and the business leaders is far and away the first step. Dan,
I dropped a link for small businesses. The Small Business Administration has some literature on recovery planning as well. So for some of the smaller organizations that don't know how to get started, that's a kind of a good resource right there. I dropped the link in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. And I see folks are asking if we're going to have a recording of this and slides available. We will. It will be posted on our website under previous webinars, and that'll get posted within about a day or so. So just check back, and also to request continuing education credits, you can email us. So, all right. The next question is from John, and he asks, for continuity and resilience, what about the connectedness of that business to systems, infrastructure, that businesses need to successfully respond and rapidly recover? What about the connectedness to and participation in community resilience decisions? Does their voice matter? Are there any examples, good or bad, that you could share?
I'm not sure I follow exactly what John is asking about connectedness. Dan, do you?
John, do you want to add maybe a clarifying question in the chat? We'll hop to another one and then come back to it if you want to just clarify a little bit what you meant there, what we're looking for. Okay. So Jason asked, how does business continuity and continuity of operations differ? How are they leveraged in the private sector versus public sector?
So Jason, I'm not maybe Dan is, but I'm not deeply familiar with the FCD 1 and 2. So I couldn't do a complete matrix, for instance, of what the differences are between that and probably 22301. I think you can probably just Chat GPT will give you a matrix that says these are the differences. The short answer is they're very parallel. Business continuity at the end of the day is about keeping the business running and is accountable to the stockholders of the corporation. And that has some nuances that I think are important when you talk about continuity. And then, of course, continuity about COOP has a responsibility to the community. And again, that there's a little bit of tension between the stockholders and interests of the stockholders and interests of the community. But in terms of methodology, off the top of my head, from when I've looked at comparisons, as I said, they're pretty parallel and similar. And Jason, I know you can use Chat GPT.
Dan, do you have anything to add, or we move on?
I mean, Russ said that very well.
Perfect. All right, let's see. We have a question from Lily Zhu again. Are there recommended guidance resources on emergency telework, including how to manage teleworkers during crises, establish communication processes, and integrate telework into emergency plans?
So I happen to be still working during COVID and for an international organization and about 150,000 employees worldwide. And we all worked from home. It was, I think, highly successful, although I do think they have largely gone back to the office. To your question, are there any recommended guidelines? Not to my immediate knowledge. I'm sure there are plenty of lessons learned. And there are certainly some things that we found that contributed to what we saw as our success. Dan, are you aware of anything any white papers that might be out there?
I'll have to look.
Yeah, I think that Google will find you.
Yeah,
we'll find you some good material. Just real quick, maybe the most important aspect of successful work from home from our perspective was, one, having a network that supported a business. Your private network had to have enough bandwidth and enough capacity to support, in our case, 150,000 folks banging away on the network. And then there's all kinds of things. For instance, Indian law did not required people to work at their place of work, and so we had to work with the Indian government to get exemptions to allow our call centers to work from home. All kinds of nuances in individual countries, but far and away, that network's the foundation, I think. Dan?
Yeah, I would say ultimately having the infrastructure set up. That was one of the big lessons learned from COVID. Initially, I worked for at that time an organization that specialized in recovery, disaster recovery as a service, as well as work from home assets. And ultimately, that was kind of the biggest shock, right? Organizations didn't understand exactly how to do it. They always assumed that they could, but didn't really know how to execute on that. And they assumed, all right, well, we just send everybody home. We'll go out and buy a bunch of laptops and ultimately it'll work. Well, then they found out that there's a laptop shortage. And then they found out, well, our infrastructure won't support that many people logging in. So I think ultimately, if you build it out carefully, work from home, and kind of helping employees do so is, make sure cameras are on, right? Promote having cameras on for meetings and having people engage, I think is a big part of it. I know one of the things that my company at the time that I worked for actually had mandatory happy hours, right? Where people would have to come in, and so that just to make sure to check on, not necessarily that they're working, but more so on kind of their mental health and make sure that they're kind of surviving that work from home, especially for people that aren't used to that aspect, right? If they're not used to it, then they can be easily distracted and go do other tasks within the house, right? For me, I've always worked remotely for the most part, so I'm a little bit different there. I kind of am more focused at home working than I am in the office, because then I talk to everybody. So
Dan, while you were answering that question, it made me think of the fact that obviously businesses and emergency management agencies are resource limited, right? Like they don't have unlimited resources. And so in that example of like laptops, right? How do you as business continuity professionals think about managing, the finite resources and wanting to plan ahead, but then, purchasing a bunch of laptops in advance may not be feasible. So I guess I'm just curious, how do you think about that issue?
That's a big challenge, because remember, particularly in the business continuity world, we're responsible to the bottom line, the stockholders, not necessarily the good of the organization per se. And how do you justify doing that? In your example, how would we justify putting aside a stock of PCs? And the answer is with a lot of difficulty in some cases. There are actually techniques that were used that I saw in use during COVID, such as even during COVID, you're going to have employees that are quitting for whatever reason. Well, you recover their laptops and repurpose them. Most companies will have a technology refresh every 3 or 4 years, where they refresh, where they replace the laptops currently in use with newer technology. Well, just hold your refresh and those kinds of things. But where you really get these kinds of challenges is in things like having entire data center failovers, because now you're not just talking a couple of laptops or even 1,000. And justifying that is it's always been a challenge and probably always will be.
Yeah. Thank you. Dan, anything else you want to add there?
No, I mean, I think one of the things that maybe has shifted is that fewer, desktop PCs have probably been purchased and more laptops, and then actually having people take them home with them has been kind of a big change since COVID.
Yeah. I think a lot of things have been turned upside down since that. Okay, let's get back to questions. So we had another person ask, how can local governments utilize ACP resources or membership for private sector businesses in our jurisdiction? So what do you recommend there?
So I'm not sure, again, I'm not sure I follow the questions. You can certainly look and see if there's an ACP chapter, and there will be in any of the larger cities. And work with and contact the local chapter and for their suggestions. I'm not sure what specifically the question's asking.
Maybe just how to engage with continuity professionals for different regions, which I think you kind of answered. So reaching out to whatever the local chapter is and just connecting seems like a good step.
And again, you can contact me and we can put you in, direct you to the local chapter. Probably you'll find it just on a Google though.
Excellent. All right, we have one more question here from Seeing You. Could you describe the workload and specific tasks that cause the most burdens for emergency managers when disasters or incidents occur? And what support measures can reduce those burdens from organizations or local community?
So I assume the question is actually for business continuity. I wouldn't want to speak for an emergency manager. I would presume that the stress of life and safety is very significant. Business continuity managers typically for life and safety response are already contacting the local emergency responders and sort of passing that responsibility off. So that I would say for both, my guess is for emergency managers and certainly for business continuity managers, that life and personal safety is the single biggest stressor in that sense. But since we typically pass it off to the emergency response, then on a data, let's see, when an incident occurs, maybe the single biggest challenge in an incident is getting all the resources you need, including the information as to what's going on, and who is impacted, and then just the mechanical process of getting everybody together to coordinate to identify what needs to be done and then getting it coordinated. And I like to think that probably business continuity folks and corporations are maybe pretty good at that. Crisis management is part of the body of knowledge for business continuity certification. And in a large corporation, you're going to have folks that focus exclusively on crisis management. They'll be called security operations centers, emergency operations centers, sometimes even network operations centers, a variety of names, crisis management teams, whatever. But they do it all the time. I mean, if you're a large company with a lot of technology, something's broken all the time, almost hourly. And so you're on, you practice a lot in real time and develop a lot of technology support. So the tools are pretty good, and at least in large corporations. Possibly one thing that business continuity might be able to share with some of the public sector.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I was going to just add real quick to that, that one of the things that I've seen, so I've worked with both public and private, is the access to data, like good information on kind of what's going on and then how to address it, right? So I think having the right tools in place to be able to manage that, whatever that tool might be, right? Is it procedural? Is it an emergency notification tool? Is it clear communication from supervisors or for folks that are in the field, right, getting back to you on kind of what's happening. So I think clear communication and then having access to that information is ultimately the kind of the most important aspect there to help reduce the burden, right? So if you know what's going on, you can make faster, quicker, better decisions.
Excellent. All right. Thank you. I think that was pretty much everyone's questions. So
Carson, did John clarify his question?
No, I didn't see it in the chat. So so maybe he can connect with you afterwards if he has a follow-up. So in our last 2 minutes, I always like to give the opportunity. Is there any final thought, 30 seconds or less, that you want to share with our Hazard Center audience?
Well, again, I'd invite you to either attend one of our meetings if you have any interest, or reach out to a local chapter and just see what we do. See, I'm sure there will be topics over the course of the year that are of interest, because a lot of times we are actually, for instance, we had a presentation years or so ago on the use of drones. I think that's something could easily be of interest to this group as well as us.
Thanks, Russ. Dan, final thoughts?
I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of speak to the group. Welcome to connect with anybody here on LinkedIn, or feel free to reach out. If you do have a copy of the slides, my contact information is actually in the QR code next to my picture.
So, and I'd like to slide in really quickly with one final thought, Carson, which is that if there's any folks at the Natural Hazard Center that have a topic they'd like to present to us that they think might be of interest, then you know where to find us.
Perfect. We will hopefully take you up on that. All right. Well, I have just a few final announcements before we sign off. And again, thank you so much to our presenters for their time and attention today. We learned so much, and thank you so much for being here. We again want to thank FEMA and the National Science Foundation for making this webinar series possible. We are so grateful to everyone who joined today. And before we close, I just want to reiterate that if you want to get continuing education credits for attending today, email us at hazardcenter@colorado.edu, which is offered through IAEM. Finally, we hope you will save the date for next month's Making Mitigation Work webinar. We will be gathering again Tuesday, February 11th from 11 to noon Mountain Time to learn more about what is happening in the world of mitigation practice and research. And our next topic will have representatives from the Bill Anderson Fund discussing their research around examining rural places, disability, and underserved populations in disasters. So we hope you will subscribe to updates through the Natural Hazard Center website to receive notifications about upcoming webinars and other free resources, including signing up for the Hazards Workshop announcements, because they are coming down the pipe right now. And on behalf of our entire Natural Hazards team, we want to again thank Russ and Dan for their time and wonderful presentation today. And thank you everyone who joined, and we will see you hopefully next month. Thank you.